Yep.
Good evening, and welcome to the Congregational Church of Laconia, United Church of Christ. Wherever you are on life's journey, you're always welcome here. Our worship service tonight is for our Good Friday service. We come here tonight to remember a man who had dreams, who had those dreams shattered, who needed time to think and to pray. A man who knew he was likely to die for what he believed. A man of extraordinary religious insight. A man who did die a cruel death.
We remember. On this night, we look at the cross and we remember the betrayal of friendship and its consequences. The casual cruelty of Roman authority and execution, and how unreliable others proved to be in a crisis. On this night, may we also remember that religious bigotry, cruelty, and unreliability are still a part of our everyday lives.
On this night, then may we learn some new precepts for living. Do not avoid contact with suffering, or close your eyes before suffering. Do not maintain anger or hatred. Do not say untruthful things for the sake of personal interest, or to impress other people. Do not live without a vocation that is harmful to humans and nature.
On this night, we remember. Now we open to the story of the crucified and risen one, arms stretched out across the chasms of fear, pulling factions into his own broken body, closer to his pierced heart, so that this planet of pain may one day claim as its own the love flowing out of that sacred, broken heart. Yes, pull us in, Spirit of the living God, into the heart of our hearts, that we might once and for all lay down our arsenals of fear and take up our tools to build the kingdom of God for the sake of creation. Amen.
Gospel of John are from the Message version of the Bible. Jesus, having prayed his prayer, left with his disciples and crossed over the brook Kidron at a place where there was a garden. He and his disciples entered it. Judas, his betrayer, knew the place because Jesus and his disciples went there often. So Judas led the way to the garden, and the Roman soldiers and the police sent by the high priests and Pharisees followed. They arrived there with lanterns and torches and swords. Jesus, knowing by now that what was coming down to him, went out, and he met them. And he said, "Who are you after?" Then they answered, "Jesus, the Nazarene." Jesus said, "That's me." The soldiers recoiled, totally taken aback. Judas, his betrayer, stood out like a sore thumb. Jesus asked again, "Who are you after?" And they answered, "Jesus, the Nazarene." "I told you," Jesus said, "that's me. I'm the one. So if it's me you're after, let these others go." This validated the words in his prayer, "I didn't lose one of those you gave."
Just then, Simon Peter, who was carrying a sword, pulled it from its sheath and struck the chief priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. Malchus was the servant's name. Jesus ordered Peter, "Put back your sword. Do you think for a minute I'm not going to drink this cup the Father gave me?" Then the Roman soldiers, under their commander, joined by the Jewish police, seized Jesus and tied him up. They took him first to Annas, father-in-law of Caiaphas. Caiaphas was the chief priest that year. It was Caiaphas who had advised the Jews that it was to their advantage that one man die for the people. Simon Peter and another disciple followed Jesus. That other disciple was known to the chief priest, and so he went in with Jesus to the chief priest's courtyard. Peter had to stay outside, the doorkeeper, and got Peter in. The young woman who was the doorkeeper said to Peter, "Aren't you one of this man's disciples?" He said, "No, I'm not." Servants and the police had made a fire because of the cold and were huddled there warming themselves. Peter stood with them, trying to get warm.
interrogated Jesus regarding his disciples and his teachings. Jesus answered, "I've spoken openly in public. I've taught regularly in meeting places and in the temple, where the Jews all come together. Everything has been out in the open. I've said nothing in secret. So why are you treating me like a conspirator? Question those who have been listening to me. They know well what I have been saying. My teachings have all been above board." When he said this, one of the policemen standing there slapped him across the face, saying, "How dare you speak to the chief priests like that?" Jesus replied, If I've said something wrong, prove it. But if I've spoken the plain truth, why this slapping around?" Then Annas sent him, still tied up, to the chief priest Caiaphas. Meanwhile, Simon Peter was back at the fire, still trying to get warm. The others there said to him, "Aren't you one of his disciples?" He denied it. "No, not me." One of the chief priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, said, "Didn't I see you in the garden with him?" Again, Peter denied it. Just then, the cock crowed.
They led Jesus then from Caiaphas to the Roman governor's palace. It was early morning. They themselves did not enter the palace because they did not want to be disqualified from eating the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and spoke, "What charge do you bring against this man?" They said, "If he hadn't been doing something evil, do you think we'd be here bothering you?" Pilate said, "You take him. Judge him by your law." The temple leaders said, "We're not allowed to kill anyone." This would confirm Jesus' word, indicating the way he would die. Pilate went back to the palace and called for Jesus. He said, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Are you saying this on your own, or did others tell you this about me?" Pilate said, "Do I look like a Jew? Your people and your high priest turned you over to me. What did you do?" "My kingdom," said Jesus, "doesn't consist of what you see around you. If it did, my followers would fight so that I wouldn't be handed over to the Jews. But I am not that kind of king. Not the world's kind of king." Then Pilate said, "So, are you a king or not?" Jesus answered, "You tell me. Because I am a king, I was born and entered into the world. I could witness to the truth. Everyone who cares for truth, who has any feeling for the truth, recognizes my voice." Pilate said, "What is truth?" Then he went back out to the religious leaders and told them, "I find nothing wrong in this man. It's your custom that I pardon one prisoner at Passover. Do you want me to pardon the king of the Jews?" They shouted back, "Not this one, but Barabbas." Barabbas was a Jewish freedom fighter.
So Pilate took Jesus and had him whipped. The soldiers, having braided a crown from thorns, set it on his head, threw a purple robe over him, and approached him with, "Hail, the King of the Jews!" And then they greeted him with slaps in the face. Pilate went back out again and said to them, "I present him to you, but I want you to know that I do not find him guilty of any crime." Just then, Jesus came out wearing the thorn crown and the purple robe. Pilate announced, "Here is the man." When the high priest and the police saw him, they shouted in a frenzy, "Crucify! Crucify!" Pilate told them, "You take him, you crucify him. I find nothing wrong with him." They answered, "We have a law, and by that law he must die because he claims to be the Son of God." When Pilate heard this, he became even more scared. He went back into the palace and said to Jesus, "Where did you come from?" Jesus gave no answer. Pilate said, "You won't talk. Don't you know that I have the authority to pardon you and the authority to crucify you?" Jesus said, "You haven't a shred of authority over me except what has been given to you from heaven. That's why the one who betrayed me to you has committed a far greater fault." At this, Pilate tried his best to pardon him, but those who had gathered shouted down to him, "If you pardon this man, you're no friend of Caesar's. Anyone setting himself up as king defies Caesar." When Pilate heard those words, he led Jesus outside. He sat down at the judgment seat in the area designated Stone Court, in Hebrew, Gabbatha. It was the preparation day for the Passover. The hour was noon. Pilate said to those gathered, "Here is your king." They shouted back, "Kill him! Kill him! Crucify him!" Pilate said, "I am to crucify your king?" The high priest answered, "We have no king but Caesar." Pilate caved into their demand. He turned him over to be crucified.
They took Jesus away. Carrying his cross, Jesus went out to the place called Skull Hill. The name in Hebrew is Golgotha, where they crucified him, and with him 2 others, one on each side, Jesus in the middle. Pilate wrote a sign and had it placed on the cross. It read, "Jesus the Nazarene, King of the Jews." Many read the sign because the place where Jesus was crucified was right next to the city. It was written in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. The high priest objected. "Don't write," they said to Pilate, "the King of the Jews. Make it, 'This man said, I am King of the Jews.'" Pilate said, "What I have written, I've written." When they crucified him, the Roman soldiers took his clothes and divided them up 4 ways, to each soldier a fourth. But his robe was seamless, a single piece of weaving. So they said to each other, "Let's not tear it up. Let's throw dice to see who gets it." This confirmed the scripture that said, "They divided up my clothes among them and threw dice for my coat." The soldiers validated the scriptures. While the soldiers were looking after themselves, Jesus' mother, his aunt, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene stood at the foot of the cross. Jesus saw his mother and the disciple he loved standing near her. He said to his mother, "Woman, here is your son." Then to the disciple, "Here is your mother." From that moment, the disciple accepted her as his own mother. Jesus, seeing that everything had been completed so that the scriptures record might also be complete, then said, "I'm thirsty." A jug of sour wine was standing by. Someone put a sponge soaked with wine on a javelin and lifted it to his mouth. After he took the wine, Jesus said, "It is done, complete." Bowing his head, he offered up his spirit. Then, since it was the day of Sabbath preparation, and so the bodies wouldn't stay on the cross over Sabbath, it was a high holy day that year. They petitioned Pilate that their legs be broken to speed death, and the bodies taken down. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first man crucified with Jesus, and then the other. When they got to Jesus, they saw that he was already dead, so they didn't break his legs. One of the soldiers stabbed him in the side with his spear. Blood and water gushed out. The eyewitness to these things has presented an accurate report. He saw it himself and is telling the truth so that you also will believe. These things happened, confirmed the scripture. Not a bone in his body was broken. And the other scripture that reads, "They will stare at the one they pierced."
After all this, Joseph of Arimathea, he was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly, because he was intimidated by the religious leaders, petitioned Pilate to take the body of Jesus. Pilate gave permission, so Joseph came and took the body. Nicodemus, who had first come to Jesus at night, came now in the broad daylight, carrying a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds. They took Jesus' body and, following the Jewish burial custom, wrapped it in linen and in spices. There was a garden near the place where he was crucified, and the garden a new tomb in which no one had yet been placed. So because it was a Sabbath preparation for the Jews and the tomb was convenient, they placed Jesus in it.
Let us be in the spirit of prayer. Dear God, the words of his disciple ring in our ears, I do not know this man. The words of the crowd echo in our ears, we have no emperor but Caesar, crucify him, crucify him. We long to think that if we had been there, we wouldn't have denied him, we wouldn't have run, we wouldn't have shouted out against him, we wouldn't have abandoned him to soldiers and spears. Yet, in our moments of honesty, when we see our heart of hearts, we know that the crowd is us. We know that their words are ours. We feel it is true because we run away from the crucifixions around us. We shout aloud in the din of vengeance and estrangement and hatred that makes our world. And the sound of the hammering of nails we replace with the music of our own private headphones, adding our own soundtrack to drown the cries of those who are crucified. So God, on this night, this one night, we ask that you let those sounds through, so that the banging of the hammer draws blood in our souls so we are touched. Just for this moment at least, just for this one Good Friday moment with the pain. We name the pain as the hammer falls on the nail. War, hunger, violence, homelessness, pollution, rape, coercion, sexual slavery, hatred, racism, hate crimes, homophobia, prejudice, exploitation, abuse. We have averted our eyes and let the hammer fall on the innocent. O God, in our shame, transform this sadness, transform our hearts, transform us toward your new world, where there is the sound of spring again. Bring forth your new creation now, we ask, not so that our guilt may be washed away, but so that the pain of each victim, of each heartbreak, of each loss, may know your new day of joy. In the spirit of him who was crucified, whom we call the Christ, who lives and reigns with you. May it be so, Easter God. May it be so. Amen. Now it is time for us to leave this time together. We have heard the story of our Savior's passion and have reflected in silence and music. Let us now commend this night and ourselves into the hands of God.
We believe in God around us, dreamer and sustainer of life.
When there was nothing but an ocean of tears, God sighed over the waters and dreamed a small dream, light in darkness, a small planet in space. We believe in God beside us, Jesus as the Christ, dream made flesh. When hate and fear were raging, when love was beaten down, when hope was nailed and left to die, Christ entered into our deep, secret places and went down into our depth to find us. We believe in God within us, Spirit who empowers the dream.
All who weeps with us in adult despair, who breathes on prison doors, never admitting it's hopeless, always expecting the bars to bend and sway and break forth into blossom.
Let each of us depart our time of worship here and in our homes with such a hope.